Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another essential conversation with well-beings. Today, I'm deeply honored. Today, we have Gloria Masters here, who has had a painful, traumatizing early life for 16 years with nobody protecting her. She has been sexually abused, physically abused, psychologically abused. Gloria has been trafficked and leased out to gangs and prostituting in clubs. There's so much to talk about this. I'm just taking a moment to just really feel into the reality of where we're going to go today. Gloria has written a book on angels' wings. And like the book, today we're going to talk about Gloria's journey from trauma to grace. And how she got to where she is today. I'm again so moved and so full of gratitude to have Gloria here today with me in the studio. Oh, well, she's in the studio with me. She's in New Zealand. Gloria, thank you. You're very welcome.
Nigel, thank you.
So where do we start with all of this? Let's start where you feel like you want to start. How did it start?
So I actually believe it's generational. I don't think my father could have abused me from babyhood had he not had some type of experiences himself. I don't know that, but I understand that that's often...
It's often the case. Not always the case, but often the case,
yeah. Yeah. I think for me, Nigel, right from the start, I wasn't seen as a person or a beautiful child, which, as we know, children are. There's such a gift. And I was never actually seen as that. I was an object. And in my father's case, as I grew, really to make money from and out of. So, yes, it was a very miserable, horrible time. And I'm very lucky to be alive, frankly, with what I had to endure. Yeah.
Yeah, having a father who abused, exploited, and was making money from his daughter instead of being able to protect her, accompany her, and walk with her and help her grow. It was the opposite. And it was, and wow. It feels horrific when I feel into this.
Yeah.
Where do you feel
and look,
comfortable?
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What moments stand out along this journey that, that between the age of 0 to 16 that you would like us to accompany that young girl so we can understand the journey, the traumatizing impact of neglect, abuse, all sorts of abuse. Walk us through that journey.
Yes, I think for me, and the reason I wrote the book was partly because I want to shed light on this and help other people. But I think for me, the pivotal time is the 11-year-old, and it was at that time that my parents' marriage ended, and we were told to choose who to live with, or that we had a choice. And even though listeners could think, well, why did she choose him? I was bribed. I was going to get a horse if I stayed with him. Well, that didn't happen, but I ended up living in that house with him for 18 months, the only female in that house, the only child, female child, with him and my brother. And that is when the horror really escalated. And I think for me, I never had anyone to protect me. No one was interested anyway. I had every second weekend being able to go to my mother's house, but frankly, she just wasn't interested. And so whichever place I was in, I never belonged, Nigel. I never had a sense of belonging or feeling of value. And I, to this day, I don't know how I did it, but I just kept going. And, you know, I think for me, the biggest, you know, there's so many memories, and I've written the book partly as a cathartic exercise. But, you know, one memory was being dragged out. I never knew when it was going to happen, between 11 and 12 and a half, thrown into my father's van and taken, being trafficked to some group somewhere and being drugged. And these were, you know, it was a cocktail of drugs. But whatever it was this night, I just know that early hours of the morning when I was home back in my own bed, I woke up, and I swear the memory's as vivid today as it was then. I saw worms coming out of my arms.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know as a child what that was, but that was so frightening. And again, I thought, who can I talk to? I need help. What's going on? But I didn't have anybody. And yeah, just so scary. So
Yeah.
scary. If you said to me what was a predominant emotion over those years, it was absolute fear. Absolute fear. And I developed a few coping mechanisms, as we do as survivors of sexual abuse, to cope. And one was hypervigilance. I could tell you at any one time who was behind me, how close they were, whether they meant well or not. I would sleep with one eye open. And I also developed, which I believe is now one of our trauma responses. You know, we have fight, flight, freeze. Well, apparently fawn is another one. So I was the queen of fawning and of making sure everybody was happy. So I became the care. The role I adopted was the carer. Why? Because I was safer if I could either anticipate and then analyze and then provide.
Yeah. This is,
So,
you know,
oh,
exactly. I'm just trying to feel again just this level of sort of existential terror and sort of fear, and this sort of environment, this atmosphere of hostility, where in seeing the world as hostile at that time, it's like you don't know the difference if someone's coming at you or if someone wants to be with you. It's so hyper vigilant, sensing almost that something bad's going to happen. And then at the same time, this sort of caretaking compensation of being able to kind of control the environment by being the golden child, by being super helpful, being Mother Teresa, being, you know,
Yeah.
like just
Yeah.
taking care of other people's needs and not having any of your own. How lonely that is as well. How deeply lonely it is because you're still being left. You're still being all alone with it. It's a survival strategy,
Yeah.
but I just feel the aloneness
Well,
that's
it's a
behind it.
survival's. Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, what really comes to mind is who who was I? Who was I? Because I couldn't actually be me, because remember, I was an object. I was not a person. A child who was trafficked sexually repetitively for many, many, many thousands and thousands of dollars my father made, to the point where he bought one of only 8 imported Pontiacs into New Zealand in the late 60s.
Wow.
So I guess for me, the one of the biggest impacts was, Nigel, I had no idea of who I was. I didn't
Yeah.
know who I was. I couldn't be me because I had to keep pulling out in front of who I was, this false self, to survive. So it's taken me decades and decades and decades of therapy to realize actually that false self is not who I am.
I think this is the journey for everybody, but it's really accentuated whenever there's this level of trauma. The creation of this enclosure that's called the
Yeah.
false self, to protect the
Mm.
sort of, I feel, the true self, the innocence in a way. And to hear you talk about it and to see you here today and how you've made it through to the other side, with which is what I'm really excited about for the viewers to feel that. Like what happened that helped you get through from that pivotal time between 11 and 12 and a half to what was the sort of journey that helped you, because this is kind of what we're talking 16 years here, so from
Yeah.
what were the steps that helped you, some more incidences, and then how did you get out of that? How did you find your way to sanity? How did you find your way to safety? How did you find your way to people who could see, hear, and feel you? Like, I'm curious about that journey.
Well, it was, I think, and to this day, I'm so grateful. I've got lovely school friends in my life who I met when I was 12 and a half.
Okay.
So I'd just been able to escape my father's house. And I think that's important for the listeners to understand as well. So the only reason that I managed to escape finally was because back in those days, the Catholic Church decreed that adultery was a sin. You couldn't actually be married and have sex with anybody else. And so I came home from school one day, my father was in bed with another woman. And I was so shocked and traumatized by that. I ran all the way up to my mother's house, which was like 4.5, 5 kilometers away. And I was so traumatized I couldn't speak. And for the first time in my life, actually, she was concerned and asked me. And I told her what I found. So she rang the local priest and then spoke to the Archbishop. Catholicism, we're talking here, Nigel.
Yes.
And he said, get that child out of that house. Thank fuck for that. That saved my
That's one.
life.
That's one good thing that the Catholic Church did. Thank they
Oh,
don't they didn't do many, but that's an wow, what an intervention.
well,
What an
and the thing was, so for you and your listeners out there, hello, not the rape, torture, trafficking, abortions, videos, absolute fear-induced terrorizing experiences that I went through. The Catholic Church is okay with that. But my father committed adultery, apparently, so therefore it's not safe for me. But that saved my life. That was my first miracle, actually. That was my first miracle.
So you started so you moved back in with your mum then?
Yes. Now, she didn't want that. She didn't like that. Remember, I'm an object to both. My mother was a classic narcissist, and my father was, in my humble opinion, a psychopath, also a narcissist. But in light of that, guess what? I still had to see my father every second weekend. And though you may think, oh, well, at least you weren't there 14 out of 14 days, can I tell you it felt harder? Because I'd have 12 days with my mother and sisters and feel safe, not seen or heard or valued or anything, unless I was the carer and provided.
Yeah.
But I then had to turn around, transform again, find all sorts of courage and bravery and cunning, actually, and try to survive those 2 days.
Wow. I've had many of my clients talk about how when family members were unsensitive to when and even might have known that there was an abuser, and where the child was released back into the abuser's home or in their car, that the level it's like you have, when you're in it all the time, it's definitely very painful and traumatizing. But whenever you're out and you have some sort of sense of a little bit of some normality, and then you're put back in it again, it just so the word that one of my clients used to describe it was like her whole being contracted. She was just in a state of continual waiting for something to come, and really, she was in a space of frozenness and hypervigilance to a higher degree than before. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, and then I have this other thought at the moment, Gloria. Did any of the school teachers, anybody notice what was going on with you? Because like you can't, like I'm so curious about where you would be spending a lot of your time. That anybody, like how you, like that period, like did anybody see anything and say anything, check in on you? Because you don't hide that sort of pressure.
Well, at school, it's funny, but at school, I was safe. So I never wanted to leave the school grounds, and I was always in trouble because I was seen. If I got into trouble, I'd get told off or sent out of the room, but someone saw me. And bizarre as it sounds, I needed to be seen. I needed to feel recognized in some way. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
the nuns would come and find me. I would never want to leave the school ground. I never wanted to go home. It was so unsafe. But I know they thought I was very naughty, and years later I caught up with the nun who was my teacher at the time, and I went and saw her, and I actually told her what the truth was and what had happened. And she said to me then, if we knew then what we knew now, Gloria, we would have said that child's been terribly abused.
Wow. Like you can undick. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just so moved right now, just feeling into that. Just being so forgotten. being so discarded, and then holding and feeling this belief that still I don't belong. I don't have the sense of belonging. I don't have the sense of value.
No,
I don't have the sense of
no.
being like when somebody checks in on me, like just this, I can't help but feel, yeah, just how empty that must feel inside.
Mm,
And I see it a lot,
did.
I'm feeling it right now in my own being. And so you were going back every 2 weeks and how was that? How long did that continue before something changed?
Oh, look, until I had to keep going. This was my mother's style of parenting, was actual complete abandonment, actually. As I say, I was useful to her if I could provide,
Hmm.
and so I would, because I needed something. I needed some sort of recognition, actually, that
Yeah.
I was a child worth loving, and I could only do that by providing that to my mother and in a different way to my father. But I think you know, I think for me, recognizing that actually there were other people in my life who I did rely on, but they just didn't know it, and they were my friends in my peer group who were also just children. But dissociation was my best friend,
Yeah.
and I was largely dissociated during those years. So I could still have fun at school.
Hmm.
Uh, one of the women who wasn't in my year but went to school has read the book and reached out the other day and said, "Gloria, I can't believe it. You were just always seem so happy and smiling, and yeah." And that
Yeah.
was my false self. That was what got me through.
Yeah. And just for the viewers watching, like sometimes seeing people smiling and being happy, being charismatic,
Yeah.
being funny
Mm.
isn't always an indicator that they are exactly what they're displaying. And,
No.
it's really, as humans, it's so important that we connect deeply with one another and to inquire. Um, this is often an interesting sign that can tell us something deeper that's going on. And yeah, that's the survival. That's the false self. That's this manufactured sort of world that keeps you removed from the body. This is the what would we kind of call it, kind of the disowned parts of self that you keep distant from. You disown parts of the self to survive, and then do what you can to survive. Um, and wow, so you had sort of these exchanges that kept you above the water with your friends at school at that time. That was quite
Yeah.
amazing that your friend, just got in touch with you recently after reading the book, and how she didn't know, you know.
Oh, no, no, that was someone I wasn't necessarily friends with. It was a friend of another friend. But all the
Mm,
girls I went to school with, yes, they knew. But I
they knew.
didn't tell them until I was in my 30s
Okay.
because, Nigel, I had repressed those memories for 16 years. It was just too difficult to sit across and have breakfast with someone who'd sold me to a gang over the weekend. So repressing those memories, I'm very grateful actually that I did.
Yeah. And again, from anybody who's watching, and if our viewers either live or on the repeat, it's so important to have a voice. It's so important to allow whatever that happened that shouldn't have happened, or whatever that should have happened that didn't happen, to be expressed, to be spoken to speak to a professional,
Mm.
to speak to a friend, to speak to someone where you feel safe to speak to, or reach out to us here at Wellbeings, or or connect with Gloria. I'm sure she'd be open to have a chat with you. But just it's so important to speak out, to allow the shame and the guilt to not continue to grow in the darkness of suppression, and to move towards expression, even though it will feel scary. So I suppose that takes me to my next question. What was the environment that helped you first start to express, Gloria? What was the space, like what was happening that helped you start to come out of the deep freeze and start to remember, or what moved you towards expression?
Yeah. Well, I was 32 years old. I was a mum, became a mum, and I just started having these horrendous flashbacks and terrible nightmares and images and sensations, and all my senses were delivering me this horrendous stuff, even taste,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, blood, and not to traumatize your listeners, but semen, and it was very odd, and I started to become very fearful. So I went and saw a psychologist, and I think it was our second session. And I said to him, "Look, I've been abused by my father," and that was the beginning of it. So yes, very horrible, dark time, trying to, bring up my beautiful family and deal with that trauma, because it was horrendous. And I suppose too, for your listeners out there, one of the things I do want to say is, the thing that kept me quiet apart from repressing was always the shame and the secrecy and the silence, because those three are what renders us incapacitated and we cannot find our voice. This all begins in secrecy and silence, and usually there's a lot of fear attached. For me, shame takes the gold every time, because somehow as children we take on the responsibility for this and the badness of it. And I'm just here to say it was never our fault. You're not alone out there, and there's many of us. And, by speaking out, even if it's to a friend or a neighbour, it can be freeing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
just want
and
to
Gloria,
indulge you.
I'm curious about, after you spoke to the psychologist and you started
Mm,
this process of coming back to these painful parts that needed to be
yeah.
grieved, and
Mm.
through the grieving there was a healing that was taking place. What was some of the pivotal moments through that journey that I'm imagining took many decades? Um, what stands out? Was it, not just with therapists, with friends, or in a workshop, or like what was some of the things that stand out as like being pivotal along that journey that helped you kind of embody and deepen and grow this solid sense of self, this grounded, sort of redefinition of who you really are, to really discover that? What else was supportive along that journey? Um,
Yeah.
Cups of
So
tea
look,
and
things. I think for me, it was being able to talk to people who loved me and instantly believed me, because their experience of me had always been truth.
Mhm.
And so to actually have that helped validate and vindicate. Apart from my family of origin, who I have now lost all of them, because how dare I speak the truth?
Mhm.
We actually had a police investigation about this, but that's a whole other story. I think having people who were happy to listen and support and and just know truth when they saw it or sensed it was good. I also joined a group where there were other
Yeah.
youngish female survivors. And actually, I'm in one at the moment called Empower Me in New Zealand, and led by 3 fantastic women who are trying to offer that support and service to others, and full credit to them. But it's those types of things I think that help. But what really broke free for me was once I'd written the book, and that took 3 years, and it's only come out this year, was, Nigel, I could hold my head up high and say, I'm a survivor of this child sexual abuse. It never belonged to me. I'm handing the shame back.
Wow. Wow. What were those 3 years like in this sort of, like it's quite something to write a book, and it's quite something to write a book so revealing and so, yeah, so vulnerable. What was, I'm imagining the releasing of that book out, it was healing in itself. What was that process like for you over those 3 years?
What was the what, sorry?
What was the
The
process like for you? How was that sort of catharsis over the 3 years of, writing the
Wow.
book?
Oh, well, my therapist at the time, I know this is a very serious subject, but I have to laugh at myself too at parts through this. Forgive me, listeners, but it's who I am. My therapist at the time was horrified because I took myself out to my childhood area, and I walked around the streets like I used to as a child, and I walked around the street, and I was a complete sobbing wreck. It was the biggest mistake I made. But I
Yeah.
was I was trying to do a little bit of research for the book, and I thought it would
Yes.
be
A
helpful, but
little bit rewounding,
she
but it's okay.
she, she said to me, "Don't you ever do that again. I will come with you if you need to do things like that, please." But I thought I was so healed I could do that. So look, it was hard. It was actually really hard to write this all out, because it was re-traumatizing. But the
Yeah.
gift in it was that I had some insights and that I hadn't had prior to that. So, one of them being that although my mother wasn't physically or sexually abusive, the form of emotional abuse through neglect and abandonment was actually just as powerful as the physical, sexual beatings and rapes. And
Exactly.
so, man, I really got the lot there. Um,
Yeah, you got the things that shouldn't have happened that did, and you got the things that should have happened that didn't happen. So and so it's like a developmental
yeah,
trauma and trauma, and
yeah,
you were a commodity to both of them. And there was you had to rise up to meet their needs instead of them coming down to meet yours, and that's the atrocity right there, because that's what parents are supposed to do. They're supposed to come down and meet their children, not the other way around. And how painful. And yeah, you got it from all ends. I'm so glad you made it through.
yeah, thank you. I actually, without being dramatic, I'm lucky to be here. There was some very, very scary times for me. And, as a child between the ages of 11 and 12 and a half, when I was locked in that house, I tried to take my own life 3 times, and I just couldn't get it right. But that was the despair. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I totally feel that place where there would be huge chunks of your being that you would want to kill off when there's that amount of abuse around. It's so understandable. And I'm also so happy that you didn't get it right.
Yeah, so am I.
Mm.
Yes, so horrendous time. But, partly writing the book as well was actually to show how the human spirit can survive and endure and overcome. And I think that's the story. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel excited about that because all I had was me, and there was something big in me that just wouldn't let me give up. Like, even though I'm talking about as a child trying to end my own life, mainly I just kept going, and I'm really grateful that I did actually.
Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting you talk about this, Gloria, because like what it takes, to tap into that human spirit, that sort of grit to be able to get through it. I think we all have it. I think sometimes it's hard to access. Some of my clients struggle a lot, and to hear your struggle, to know that you made it through, and although um, with a lot of forces against you throughout that whole journey, that at any stage you could have given up. It definitely is a testament of what we can work through. And then the real work, one thing is, surviving it. And then the next part is really living it. And I suppose that takes me to my next question. When were the moments in your life where you then started to feel a sense of belonging? When did you then start to feel a sense of value to the world that's other than a commodity or an object?
I I was very lucky that I became a therapist myself, and I'm an ex-teacher, an ex-therapist, and now I work in corporates and government agencies. Um, but there's always been a part of me, and the the disintegrated bits started to come together and integrate a little more. So I think even in my teaching days, in my early 20s, I really felt I belonged because I wanted the children I taught to feel they all had something special about them, and we were going to
Hmm.
find out what that was. And yeah, that was beautiful to me because every one of us, and we're just big kids now, but has something special and unique. And I really wanted children, I wanted to show them who they were, and I had no idea of why I was that type of person, but I was. And then I think through the psychotherapy clinic I ran, there was that aspect of really being able to support people on their journey of self-discovery. So I felt belonging in that. And I've got some fantastic groups of friends, and they often tease me because they can run, but they can't hide. and once you're in my life, you're kind of there. and uh, and I'm really grateful. I do feel a sense of belonging to many people and groups. But I do want to say, actually, and this is a common thing, I think, among us who have experienced our child sexual abuse, is there's often that feeling of being alone or different. And when you feel different, it's really hard to feel as though you fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
And
It's
people don't get you. Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why I asked that question, to see, because a big part of the healing is to be able to, walk towards, because there has to be And when there's any sort of trauma, there's times when you're either walking towards people hiding under a false self, which is you're still alone, or you're isolating and avoiding socializing on some level. There's isolation that takes over, or a sort of social anxiety around being around people for all the reasons that you've mentioned. And again, for the viewers out there, it's yeah, like if you're noticing you have social anxiety, noticing that you struggle to connect, to noticing that you feel different, to noticing that you have tendencies towards to pull back and withdraw or isolate, and this has become habitual. Now, it's not necessarily saying that there was trauma, but it's definitely something that you can talk to a professional about to really get help. But for the people who have had trauma and sexual abuse, that this is another part of the struggle, that the healing
Yeah.
comes with people. But I understand that people were others were the people that, that created the trauma in the first place. So it is scary to take those steps towards connection, closeness, you know, and only when we do that can we get to the other side and have that sense of that we belong, that we're part of something, that we matter, that there's people actually there who care. But it is a journey to be able to get through that. And yeah, it starts with a step towards, even though it could be a shaky step, a little bit clunky, a little bit fearful. But my prayer for anybody who's watching who is struggling is that you take that small step, and it's not supposed to be at the beginning easy to take that step, but we can't do this by ourselves. And to hear Gloria's real testament of how a massive part of the healing, as I'm hearing here, is just how she then started to formulate these different ways, either in her practices or in her private life, where she had groups of people, where she had people who she could lean into, where she had people who knew her, where she had people who would check in on her. And as she jokingly said, when you're in, you're in. She doesn't let you get away then, So that was, she was joking, but there was something beautiful in that, is that she was able to get to a place inside her where people became important again, where people mattered to her when a long time ago they were abusive to her. And that's an essential part of the journey, I think, for that helps healing happen. Again, I say this almost every week, that we can't do this thing called life by ourselves. We need others, or at least we can start to look at why it's so hard to move towards other people. Well, that's such a powerful image to see that those stages in your life was there was these groups of people, and to hear that you're in a group still, and how powerful that must be, that you're amongst others, exploring and talking and sharing and deepening. I don't think it ever stops, Gloria.
I don't think it ever really does either. And, I've often been asked, look, why, will you ever be healed of this? And my thing is probably not, but I'm a long way along the path. And I've learned to forgive, and forgiveness is an interesting one, and it angers people, Nigel. And I think it angers people because they think, well, how could you possibly forgive those heinous criminal activities? Well, to be honest, I did it for me, because if I held on, and man, I could hold on, don't get me wrong, I held on to anger and blame and all of that for a long, long time, and I'm not going to forgive you, you assholes. But the point is that I realized it was actually hurting me, because they didn't know, because I had no relationship with them. So forgiveness is not for anyone else but ourselves, and it's really important to have that self put first, because we can't heal if we're holding on to other things. It's a big roadblock, actually.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's so essential part of the journey. And it reminds me of a story that happened. I think I might have said this a couple of months back, but in my early years of being in the sort of what you would call the shamanic work that I used to do, sort of transpersonal development. And one of my teachers at that time is a shaman from Siberia, and another one from Lakota. And the Lakota was telling me about his teacher. And in the middle of the Civil War in America, he was a young 8-year-old boy who witnessed his mother and sisters all being abused sexually and killed in front of him, and his father being killed. And as he matured, he went through a life of, he was a Native American Indian, and he went through drinking and had a lot of problems. And then he found his way, to find these men. One of them had died. There was 2 of them, and he went to the nursing home where he was staying. And he went into the nursing home and he said who he was. Of course, the guy wanted to dismiss him. I don't care you. And he was very rude to the Native American Indian man. And he says, well, I'm not here for you to accept me. I'm here for me. I'm here to forgive you. He says, I don't want to forgive me. He says, yeah, well, that's fine. He says, but I'm here for me. I'm here to let it go here today. And I forgive you for the pain. And I'm letting the pain go now.
Mm.
And then he came out, and of course there was a whole thing with eagles came around him, and there's a whole sort of interplay with nature and how nature came on board at that time and really celebrated the journey. He'd had to grieve many years to get to that place of forgiveness, as I'm hearing that what you had to do. But it was such an essential part of him being able to then move up in the tribe, and then how he then became a sort of elder because of that transition, which was so powerful. And I heard that as a 17-year-old teenager. And it stayed with me ever since, the importance of being able to do that, but the work that was required to be able to do it, where it wasn't just a cognition, where it was a full bodily, it was a whole bodily lived experience, which is 2 different things. Sometimes we rush to wanting to forgive because it should be the thing to do, versus, no, this is the time. I've grieved now. Now's the time. So that was part of I was feeling that as you were sharing there. And I suppose as we're coming to the end here, Gloria, and just really feeling into just a few more questions, just to really help our viewers really understand, that there is light at the other end of darkness. And I'm curious, is what jumps out as something that feels important that you can share about your book that's out at the moment? I want them to hear a little bit about, again, just you've kind of echoed it already in today earlier around the reason that you want to share the story so other people can have where one person can get the courage to be able to share their story. But tell us a little bit about the book and what even like the name, like underneath, like the from trauma to grace. Tell us a little bit about this book so that the readers can really feel into it.
Well, look, I'd love to be able to say it's a light, easy read, but that is not the case. It is, it's challenging and it is confronting, but it's truth. And I think I have been told that it is an easy read in terms of, I've written it so that you can pick it up and focus on what the messaging is. But basically, it's a recounting of those years, and it's a look at how I managed to get through it. And in terms of the image on the cover of the book, first of all, what I really wanted was to depict the worst time in my life, which was age 11. So you'll see the light coming down and you'll see the angel wings around this beautiful child who is 11, and she's looking down. And that was my story. In terms of the title, I have to say my angels came in and gave me that. I had a different title, but it just kept coming to me that actually I'm only here because I was on angel's wings. and they're still with me, helping me today.
Wow. Wow. And for people watching, what do you feel that you'd like to say to someone who's dealing with sexual abuse
Yeah,
or
yeah,
physical abuse or neglect in the home where you're being forgotten? And what would you like to say that you feel that's important to the viewers who either have had to struggle with that or are still struggling with that
yeah.
now in their life and their families?
You know, you're an exceptional human being, and you're not alone out there. And there's something in you that wants you to survive this. And all you need to do is just trust that you will get through this and that there's always hope. And even asking for a sign sometimes can help. But definitely having the words come out of your mouth is so powerful. Yeah, so I think that's really key. And the other thing I want to say to your listeners out there, Nigel, is this. Because my story's so big, people feel sometimes that they can't possibly share or compare. And I want to just give a little bit of attention to this comparative suffering. And we know Brene Brown talks about it. And can I just say, you know what really touches me is the one person that comes forward and says, something happened to me at 8, or beautiful male friends of mine that say, you know, I was 11 before I realised. It may have only been one incident, but it's in that one, that initial, that first, that actually the damage is done. So
Yeah.
please don't compare. Your story is just as powerful and important. And my wish is that if even one person finds the courage to speak out or get some help, well, that really touches me, actually humbles me. Yeah.
I can feel that. I can feel that sort of transmission, the longing, the deep seated longing that for everyone to have to know that that you're that there's not yours is worse, mine's is less. Let's stop minimizing whatever's going on and know that if it happened or that it's important to talk about it. And And again, for those who are watching, if anyone is struggling, we have a directory of therapists in and around Europe and the UK and Ireland. If you are wanting to speak to someone, please message us and we can give you the details. You can message us and we can support you also at Wellbeings. And also, I'm sure Gloria would take a message if anybody who feels like they want to share how they're moved by or how they, maybe people in New Zealand who are watching, maybe you could also help them, give them some resources, Gloria, about where they could go and get help as well. For anybody out there, it's just important to start with that first step
Yeah.
towards moving towards the other, moving towards someone. And I think we're going to end today on that, like moving towards the other is where it starts for change to happen. We can't do
Yeah.
this by ourselves. And again, I'm so privileged to have you here, Gloria, and I want to thank you for your bravery and your courage, your grit, for making it through and shining. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for watching today. Anybody who feels moved by what you've seen, please hit a like or a share or a subscribe. It really helps us reach more people. It helps us get the message out. And I suppose the message here today is that we can't do this by yourself. We need others. And if any of you is really moved by what Gloria was talking about today, please avail. All the links are below if you want to get her book, where then you can really deepen into this story that's tragic, real, but also encased in hope, in light, which really comes from when we move towards the other, towards life, towards connection. When everything feels dark, it's the moving towards the other that helps. So wishing you all a wonderful day, a real day, a vulnerable day, an authentic day, wherever you are in the world. And yeah, we can't do this thing by ourselves. So reach out if you need support. You're worth it. You're worth it. You're worth it. Thank you.